I was one of the MCs on the night of November 4th, 2020. I'm just here a year later to make sure that we continue the campaign to get the politically motivated charges against me and the 646 plus other people that exercised our right to free speech and exercised our right to direct democracy on November 4th, 2020. You know, I think like we have to remember what brought us to the spot in that moment, which is that, you know, bourgeois democracy changes over hands every 4 years. And after the uprising, after the lynching of George Floyd, the pandemic and the uprising that followed, you know, the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression called us together as people's movements across the country to say that Black Lives Matter, to say that we had to stop imperialism and U.S. aggression, that we had to welcome immigrants, that we had to protect the land, land back for Native folks. Really, what we needed was, regardless of whether Trump or Biden won, we needed a people's mandate. And a year later, what we see is that the presidencies changed, the regimes changed, but the conditions stayed the same. And I think like when I think about the things that we came here a year ago to fight for, we haven't seen movement on any of them. Kids are still in cages. After the lynching of George Floyd, we've seen 3 high-profile police killings just in Minneapolis Metro since then. And like really, that shows why we were out here. And I think when we see the political repression that's happening against the 646 people that took that action, that was about Tim Walz and Jacob Fry setting the precedent that we're not going to allow mass movements to take place anymore. We're not going to allow people to take democracy into their own hands. This idea that like being on the highway was disruptive or that protests are disruptive is reality, but let's be clear, it's about disrupting the status quo, because the status quo is disruptive for our lives. Evictions are disruptive, deportations are disruptive, family separation is disruptive, pipelines through indigenous lands that threaten our water are destructive, and we as people can't allow for the government to continue to trample on the land and our people the way that they are. And so we came out to say we need a different future, and with what we've seen, the way that the government has reacted to the protests over the summer after the lynching of George Floyd, the way they've reacted to the 646, the way they've reacted to Line 3 water protectors shows that they are determined to continue profits, to continue to have their sake of safety be more important than the lives of Black, Brown, Indigenous, and immigrant people. On November 4th, we saw an amazing community come together. It was working class people, it was Black, it was Brown, it was Indigenous, it was immigrant, it was youth, and it was people who sort of were taking the future into their own hands, and people that were rejecting sort of all of the domination that monopoly capitalism and feudalism and exploitation have sort of brought on our communities. And it was a bunch of people who fought back, but they weren't fighting back because of hatred of the other side. They were fighting back because we love our people so deeply that we can't continue to see the expropriation of our resources, the exploitation of our land and our labor. And so when I saw over 1,000 of my neighbors gather the day after a presidential election to say, like, we need a new vision. It doesn't matter who the president is. We need like a new vision. We need to end capitalism. We need to end U.S. imperialism. It was beautiful. And it was a joyful expression of what we wanted to see for the future. And really what we saw, the overreaction of the police, the massive waste of resources in the middle of a global pandemic spent to prosecute nonviolent protesters and try to scare people out of their democratic rights, that's shameful. It's shameful on behalf of Tim Walz, it's shameful on behalf of Jacob Fry, it's shameful on behalf of the Democratic Party. And it's shameful, you know, that in a city that's labeled as so progressive that we're still having these battles and that we still have some of the worst inequities in the country. And I think like seeing 1,000 people come out again the day after an exhausting election to say this future needs to look different because the status quo isn't working was an expression of our people's love for one another and our people's belief that we deserve better. We're going to keep fighting until they drop the charges. We're going to keep staying in the streets until the murder of black and brown and indigenous people ends. We're going to stay in the streets until capitalism is overthrown, and we're going to stay in the streets, and we're going to win a future for all of our people.